Welcome to Off Panel.
Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is an artist extraordinaire and the cover artist of comics like The Sheriff of Babylon and DMZ, amongst many others. It's John Paul Leone. Thanks for coming on, John.
Hey David, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing well. Actually, one thing I really wanted to mention is I always do a lot of research as to. I go back and I read people's interviews before I have a conversation with them, just because I want to make sure, I know what people respond to and what people don't respond to. And you don't do a ton of interviews. I'm actually I don't know. I actually had to think this time. It was really problematic.
Oh, really? that's okay. So, I did one with you not long ago, right? About maybe a year ago.
Yeah.
That was about cover process, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny because I sort of see myself as actually doing a lot of these kinds of things in interviews and stuff, but I guess I don't.
I guess relative to the other people I talk to, you are very quiet and reserved.
Oh, well, I guess that applies not only to my frequency on the interview circuit, but it also applies to me as a person. I am a pretty quiet and reserved guy.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, we talked about this. Where I wanted to start was kind of like your background and kind of what informed your art and everything like that. And we talked about this in the interview on Sketch, but not everybody reads my stuff. I wanted to talk about your background. You went to the School of Visual Arts in New York City, which is a very notable school in America for artists. And at the time, you attended, you had classes with Will Eisner, Walt Simonson, a ton of other people. I'm curious, going into that experience, did you know you wanted to work in comics, or is that something you figured out as your time there went along?
I had a pretty good idea. I was heading towards comics, or at least some sort of art that dealt with narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I always drew comics as a kid, and I always read comics as a kid, and collected comics. And then for high school, I went to a school in Miami, because I went to high school in Miami. I actually still live in Miami now.
Mm-hmm.
And this was sort of a magnet school that had kids doing extra art classes in a discipline, either dance, music, drawing, or visual arts, and theater. They had extra classes, or at least intensive study after the school day was done.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very fine arts. What I'm trying to say is it was a very fine arts focused program. And, I was coming in as this kid who liked comics, and I sort of, through the course of those 3 years, got that kind of beat out of me.
Yeah.
Because they didn't really think of comics as a worthy thing to follow.
Right.
A worthy career path, or I guess maybe I'm being too hard on them, but I definitely got the impression comics were not respected. But then upon going to SVA, I knew I wanted to sort of get back into
Like
my
narrative?
ideas. Just practicing art in more practical terms, in terms of doing illustration or some kind of advertising art or comics,
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't so, for lack of a better word, fine arty,
Yeah.
very conceptual, So SVA really appealed to me. I liked the fact that there were working professionals teaching,
Mm-hmm.
and so getting to SVA was almost like a relief to finally having commercial art or a desire to do commercial art. That sounds really terrible to say. Commercial art, but that was cool. That was sort of what the program was built on, really.
Right.
It was the School of Illustration and Cartooning before it was SVA.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that sort of practical side of artwork, of making art. And of course I've always been into narrative, movies and comics and TV and stuff. So I knew I wanted to do something where if it was not illustration for magazines or for books or book jacket covers or something, or magazine illustration. I know I wanted my work to somehow have some kind of narrative element to it, and a better medium than comics. So, this is also, we're talking about late 1980s. So right around this time is when The Dark Knight is coming out, Watchmen, Batman Year One. A lot of great comics are being made. Sienkiewicz, Walter Simonson, Frank Miller. Those guys are they're in their prime, I guess, at that point. At least for me, from my point of view then. So, but it seemed like there was an opportunity to. And all this I'm saying in retrospect. At the time, this stuff was not on my mind, But in retrospect, it seemed like there was almost permission given to try and take comics to a more artistic level. And artists like Sienkiewicz, they were solving problems in a different way,
Yeah.
Walt Simonson, a lot of design in the way he solves problems. A lot of typography going into the work,
Yeah.
Graphic design solutions as opposed to traditional comic book solutions.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm getting off track, so
No. I mean, that's kind of exactly where I was planning on going, because that's one thing I think is interesting is about the time you were coming up. It was kind of that was when there was a lot of articles coming out being like, pow, boom, bam, comics aren't just for kids anymore. And there's been a million of articles about those over the years. But things like Dark Knight and Watchmen and beyond, those were the projects that kind of made people realize that it didn't just have to be super bombastic superheroes. There could be an element of realism to them. And that's one thing I really like about your work. I was actually reading Earth X last night. That's a super fantastical story. But one thing I really liked about your approach is, or just the story in general, is all felt very grounded, and it gives a lot of weight to what's happening on the page. The way that you approach that, and the way I don't know if that's just kind of your natural leaning as an artist, or if that's kind of the influence from that era, kind of working into form this blend of influences to make you want to work like that. But I'm curious, is that an appeal to working on comic projects for you? The whole adding realism to a really fantastical and, otherworldly type story?
Can you put a fine point on that?
Sure. Is that something that appeals to you about, comics in general, that you can give an otherworldly story kind of a more weight to it? And I know that isn't the same for every project you've done, but I just thought, I was thinking about that when I was reading Earth X, and I was curious.
Yeah, that's a good question, David, because I think that the thing I was having a tough time getting to is, at what point do I realize that, at what point do I become aware that I am consciously trying to do something?
Right, sure.
Because I don't think that I maybe went into Earth X or any job or any drawing with that firm idea of how and why I want to draw it a certain way.
Sure.
It just so happens that when I begin a job, I'm trying to draw as well as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as simple as that. And whatever I can do to try and draw as well as I can because I'm just a big believer that if I can draw as well as I can the story that I'm supposed to tell, then people will believe it.
Right.
I have to believe it in order to draw it, convincingly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I asked you. That's why I interrupted you and asked if that's true, because you said that, that the weight that I put in some of the work gives it a sort of believability or lifelike quality. So I'm sorry I interrupted you, asking you if you felt that. Is that true? I mean, do you really feel that? Because I personally, I don't see it, because it's my own work. So see, I'm very aware of the fact that you have a very different perspective on the work than I have.
Mm-hmm.
So, but in short answer to your question is, I'm just trying to draw as well as I can,
mm-hmm.
and at a certain point, in the course of telling the story, because it's a lot of hours and hours and hours drawing, at a certain point, sometimes, yes, I become aware of the fact that, oh, what's interesting about this to me is that all of a sudden now I believe what I'm drawing.
Right.
So maybe 5 minutes ago I didn't. But all of a sudden now I believe what it is I'm drawing, even if it's something as crazy as Galactus, which is so off the from left. I mean, really a crazy thing, right? Or Machine Man.
Yeah.
Absurd, crazy. But if I can get myself to a point where I actually believe that it's true, these crazy things that I'm drawing, then I'm in a good place. Now. I have to say that is a rare place for me, and maybe other artists experience it differently, but that's a rare place for me to find myself.
Right.
Because usually what happens is I sort of get caught in how do I express this? There's always an idea in my head of what I'm supposed to do, like how I'm supposed to solve this problem. Sometimes I read a script and I can tell that, oh, well, this is the solution that the writer's asking for. This is the sort of shot that, I can see what I'm supposed to do by the description of this panel. Usually when I become aware of that, I will consciously try to not do that. Because I'm aware of this idea. This idea is not coming from the writer. This idea is coming out of my own head and out of my own prejudices and preconceptions of what a comic should look like. Sure. Right? A set of ideas of what makes a good comic or what makes a good illustration. So if I become aware of the fact that I'm going down that path, it's a good time to maybe not go down that path and try something else or think about solving the problem another way. Now, all of this, like I think, may sound like very self-indulgent, very like who gives. I mean, this doesn't show in the work. Really, I often look at my own stuff and think it just looks very, for lack of a better word, just boring. Like slavishly so. Sure. And so when I start to say this stuff about actual process observations, whether or not any of this stuff shows up on the page or is, somehow carries over to the final product and affects a reader at all, is anybody's guess. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know.
That's actually one of the really fascinating things about comics is I as a reader can read Earth X and start thinking all of these things about what you were thinking and what you were doing and all of that. Or even like a cover for Sheriff of Babylon, I can look at that and I'm like, oh, so he read the script from Tom King and this is exactly what his distillation of the Sheriff of Babylon number 12 was. But in reality, I mean, I have no idea what it was. You may have just been given a note from Tom that said, I don't know, draw a bunch of random crap that represents the earlier issues of this, and that may have been that. There's all kinds of different things that could be leading into that we don't even know. And that's the thing for a lot of comic artists I've spoken to, especially on interiors, is to a certain degree, past the layout phase, past problem solving, past figuring out how exactly that page is going to work, you don't really actively think. It's kind of like it becomes very gut oriented. It becomes a feel oriented thing. And I think that's one of the interesting things is, I can make all these glorious suppositions from my end, all these deductions as to why you did this, but it may be a much simpler or much more complicated process than I can ever even realize. And that's, I don't know, I guess that's why comics are kind of interesting, is because it's subjective on kind of from every angle you can possibly have, even from the creative one, because you can push against those instincts that you have to make it look like a comic because that feels right.
It is subjective from every angle. It is subjective from every angle. I'm trying to think if that's uniquely if that's unique to comics. We could say that everything is really subjective from every angle. Actually, the question is not whether or not. Yeah, well, everything is subjective from every angle. The question, I guess, is there an object? Is there such a thing as objectivity?
Right.
in just does as a concept, not as a fact. Does that exist?
Not entirely in 2016.
Well,
but I mean, it is an interesting question because I don't think comics are unique in that regard, as you were saying. But at the same time, I do think for a lot of things, I feel like people have an idea as to how some things work. But I think a lot of times, I don't think people really know how comics work. I think they either think that they're these magical things that just appear, or they think that, like, you're sitting in your art laboratory, like, slaving over every single detail, and, like, sometimes it can be less than that. Sometimes it can just be like you're doing it because it feels right. And I think that might be where comics are unique in some regards, is that I think the average comic fan lacks the necessary knowledge to really appreciate the art that a lot of people do in a really comprehensive way. But I don't know. I mean, it gets down to feeling for even the readers. So I wanted to ask about the difference between approaching covers and interiors, because a lot of the stuff you do these days is covers. But, you know, I read the story you did with Tom King and Vertigo's CMYK Black issue, Black Death in America. One thing I'm curious about is, you know, especially given the fact that with your covers you really try to tell a story, how different is the thought process for you for interiors versus covers? Like, do you feel like those come from the same part of your brain, or do you have a slightly different approach for each?
I have very different approaches. Mm-hmm. And both are fun for me. Both they're two very different types of challenges, and I enjoy them both. Covers are for me just they always start off as you know, just wide open with possibilities. Mm-hmm. And you know, obviously for me, well, maybe not obviously, I think it would be obvious to probably any cover artist who you talk to, they probably would tell you they would like as much information about the story as possible.
Yeah.
Beforehand, before doing the picture. So, you know, if there's a script, hey, let me read the script. If there's a plot, let me read the plot. Whatever you can give me that tells me, you know, as much as you can give me about the story, the better, right? Mm-hmm. Because then it's easier for me to figure out three. Usually, I try and do three solid ideas for a cover, mm-hmm. and propose those as sketches.
Right.
So it's easier for me to come to three good ones and propose those. It's easier if I have a lot of story, right?
Right.
If it's just two lines of like, well, see if this issue we're just going to do somebody, you know, gets pickpocketed in a cab, and you know, then there's a shootout at the end, and you know, then there's a blackout, and that's it. So, you know, you have some characters, maybe you throw in some big heads. You have to make some interesting picture out of it, right?
Right.
Now that's challenging enough to do with one sketch. But that limited information I just said there, that ridiculous thing, is not very much for just one illustration.
Right. Now
to do three, you know, that are different enough that you're not repeating yourself from that much information is very difficult.
Right.
Without getting into just then doing these sort of classic, what's the term for it? Money shots, or just classic representation of a character that you can put anywhere.
You mean like pinups kind of things?
Yeah, like a cover that you could put on any issue. Right. A Batman cover you could put on any issue of Batman. It's not story specific. It's just a cool shot of Batman, right? You know, that kind of thing. Sometimes the assignment calls for that, right?
Right.
You know, that's. I don't enjoy doing those covers as much because I don't have as much to go on, you know? But if that same cool shot of Batman could be somehow fused with something that happens in the story that makes it specific to that story, then we're on the road to like maybe a good picture, right? Because it becomes more specific.
Right.
And montages are always always fun. They are a lot of work, and they require a lot of research.
Right.
So when for Sheriff especially, I would just go through whatever information I had for the story, and create a file for Iraqi cops, create a file for mosques, create a file for tanks, create a file for Humvees, create a file for U.S. Special Forces, create a file for AR-15s, just create all these different files, reference files, and then just gather material.
Mm-hmm.
And just see if I can, like, from the images I can gather off Google Images, maybe, come to, a few that I think are cool graphically. And then if I put them together, change a few things around, maybe I can come to a montage that starts to deal specifically with the story.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can get a bunch of different, ideas from different scenes, and maybe different faces or different cars, and different sense of scale to the shots. Maybe some are very long shots with a cityscape or something, and another one is just a close up of I may need a really good shot of a certain pistol or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that way I could start to come to like a cool montage that maybe speak specifically to that story, not just something that you can put anywhere.
For covers, it seems like the more information you can have, the better, because it can allow you to create something that has more specificity to that specific story it represents.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's one of the tricky things. It's like, I don't know, like, so for Sheriff, for example, like how much information were you getting from Tom for like an issue of that?
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first few issues, I got the whole script.
Oh, wow.
Which was, well, that's best case scenario, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. And as the series went on, there were more, because I was getting ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think they just like to work like very far ahead of schedule with the covers specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would get like these, breakdowns, like a description, maybe a paragraph, of, and sometimes, I struggled to come to an image that I felt, was meaty enough in terms of narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I think it worked out well. It's funny. Sometimes this happened with DMZ. I did a bunch of covers for DMZ, and then I actually happened with the Massive too. I did a bunch of covers for the Massive, both Brian Wood stories. And then upon reading the series, because I wasn't reading the series as I was doing the covers. Sometimes I was way ahead. The script hadn't been written yet. So upon reading some of these stories and then going back and looking at my cover, I was disappointed in the job I did as cover artist. I was like, oh, you know what? This doesn't quite work for this story. If I'd have had the script and I'd been able to read it before I did the cover, I could have, somehow done a better job. But it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah, it could have been more representative of what was inside the pages. But I mean, I think that's one of the things that I really loved about your covers for Sheriff of Babylon is, like, you didn't have full scripts for all of them, but if you read the issue and then you go back to the to the cover, it feels very representative of it. And I know that it was meaningful to you that I don't know, like the story itself had a lot of weight and it was really grounded in reality, and like that gives you the ability to really gather a lot of resources for it. Like you're saying, all those different files of AR-15s, of Humvees, of, mosques and everything like that, to really have a good basis to build off of, to give the covers a very realistic feel to it too. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to ask about, you're talking about doing montages and things like that. And one thing we talked about in the previous interview we did was how for some covers you'll use separate pieces of paper and combine those into different layers. And that, that could be one of those things that's super common that us laymen out here don't actually know that artists do. But it's not something I've ever come across when talking to other artists. How did that first come together? And was that Did you just come across a project where it became a necessity and then it just became a thing you did, I guess?
Yeah, I think I can't pinpoint what cover it was, but that's how it came out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
Just it might have been a DMZ cover where I knew I was going to hold the background in color, and figured, man, I'll just draw this on a light box and it's on a separate sheet, and it made it go much smoother. So yeah, but I don't always do that. Actually, I haven't done it in actually quite a while.
Oh.
I like having the piece as a unit, as a physical thing,
Mm-hmm.
So I try to avoid doing that as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's so obviously going to, in the works as part of the plan, that it's like I can't bring myself to not do it that way because it just makes sense. And a lot of times it's easier too if it's like some textural thing that you don't want it to like mess up, another part of the drawing. So you do want to keep them apart. So it depends.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, that's, you have to find, that's, people often use with comic art, or actually any type of art, it really comes down to problem solving. You're trying to find the best way to represent the story or whatever your piece of art you're working on. And it makes sense that you would have to find a different solution for each one. But for your process, I know you're a bit traditional and you're also a bit digital. So let's say for like an issue of the Sheriff of Babylon, what would your process be for coming up with a cover from start to finish?
It's pretty much the same method. Let's see. So I get the email with some story information,
Mm-hmm.
script, and I'll read through that, and I'll write down different categories of things from the script that I found might make for good images.
Sure.
I have any scripts lying around that might have these notes on them. Okay, so I'll make notes showing I'll need reference for detainees,
Mm-hmm.
Prisoners of war. I'll need reference that is specific to the Green Zone in Iraq. I'll need reference of what does an Iraqi suburban home look like?
Mm-hmm.
What would some of the furniture be like in there? I'll need reference for news footage. I had this kick where I was looking for specifically news footage images because I wanted to, when I had a chance to represent some kind of action in this story, I thought it should look as much like photojournalism as possible.
Sure.
Just so I wanted those kinds of images that maybe there's something about them that is simpler than you might expect, but they communicate more because of their lack of focus.
Yeah.
Some grainy material sometimes could be very powerful. Mm-hmm. Suicide vests. What does training look like for the Iraqi police? Do we have what they wear? Do they wear T-shirts? Do they wear? What does the space look like that they train? Different, just subjects. Different categories that I may need to look for images on.
Mm-hmm.
I'll write these categories down, and then I'll just methodically get on Google Images for a couple of days and start pulling images for this stuff. Maybe not a couple days for a cover. Maybe a couple days if I was doing the interiors of a whole book.
Right.
Then certainly a couple days. But for a cover, maybe a half a day to a day of looking for reference.
Mm-hmm.
And gathering reference, and then from those images, as I'm pulling them out, I don't pull it out unless I know, this image could give me some kind of, this image has something. I'm not sure what it is, but there's something about maybe the shape that guy's making when he's lying on the pavement, dead with his, arms. There's something about that shape that's interesting. So I don't know if I'm going to use it, but I'm going to take that picture.
Sure.
And put it in this file. So then I'll gather all these images, and then I'll take the 8.5 by 11 regular typewriting paper. Sure. And I have, the dimensions of the comic cover on the paper. So it's actual print size. Mm-hmm. I'll do my thumbnail sketches print size.
Wow.
So I'll start to work on coming to an image just by looking through these files and just start sketching. That head looks cool. That guy holding the rifle looks cool. That I'll start maybe I could use that, to start to form some cool shapes on the page. And then at some point, either before this or during it, I'll have to think, what kind of a picture is this going to be? Is this going to be a montage? And if so, is there going to be like a big head in the background again? Is that the deal? So who's it going to be? I'll have to start thinking, is this going to be a scene from the story if I know the scenes? Mm-hmm. And just do an illustration and treat it almost like an illustration from do you know Robert Fawcett, the illustrator?
No.
You should. Robert Fawcett was a mid-century illustrator. He did a lot of work in magazines and in, I believe, also book illustration. Mm-hmm. But he was a brilliant draftsman, and his illustrations for Sherlock Holmes are incredible. They're just stunning. If you see his work, you probably will recognize that you've seen it before. But his illustrations are really scenes, or his best illustrations, I think, are really scenes from the story. Mm-hmm. And it almost looks like you're looking at a stage play. I mean, everything is so meticulously rendered and researched, and I'm down to the last fingernail. Yeah. I mean, but it sounds very boring the way I describe it to you now. But look up his stuff and look at his pictures. You'll see that the drawing is just unparalleled. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so that's a good example of just very effective illustrations that are basically scenes. Straight up scenes from the story. Nothing wrong with that. Then once I kind of have an idea what kind of a picture this is, I can sort of begin to put certain reference aside. I'm going to use this reference. Well, for this one, I'll save that reference for the next one. I'll start to become a little bit more discerning with my reference. Mm-hmm. So I start to arrive at something that works as a sketch for the best cover or the best movie poster I could probably do for this story. Mm-hmm. Forget about the fact that I'm going to do 3 of these. I'm going to try and come up with the best idea I can, like just for this thing, and if I can get that to finish, well, this is just a sketch, but what I mean is like a finished concept. You can tell by looking at it what the idea is, you have a good idea of what the final cover will look like. If I can get that, then the other 2 usually come a little easier. Mm-hmm. Because I already have something that I can work off of,
Yeah. You're just kind of like fine tuning, like you have that initial idea and you've already worked through the reference and everything, and you can kind of fine tune other ideas out of that to a certain degree.
Yes, right. You're right. Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like a lot of times when you, I don't know, it's an internet thing, but I think people are like this kind of in general. But some people have a really like negative view of photo reference, but it seems it's like a weirdly evil and taboo thing in some people's minds.
Why?
That's the thing I think is really curious. Like it's odd, but it's such an essential element to kind of adding verisimilitude to the world, like having actual. Like, you don't want to just draw some weird ass gun that doesn't exist in the world, or like, completely misrepresent what Iraq is like, because, if let's say I'm a military veteran, I'm reading Sheriff of Babylon, and I look at this cover, I'm like, well, this comic clearly has absolutely no interest in, representing this world correctly. So right. I don't know. I mean, to me, it makes sense to use photo reference, but to you, why is photo reference not just, an absolutely fine thing to use, but an essential element to your art? I think it well, I have so many things to say about what you just said. Before we even get to that, let's like for a second stop at why do people feel like photo reference is a bad thing? I think they think it's cheating. It's
I
like,
think they think it's cheating, right? That's what I was going to say, right? I think they think it's cheating. So what's up with that? I mean, what is cheating about it?
I don't know.
I mean, is it that people think that somehow if I just sit down and make it all up, I'm somehow a more creative artist? Is that the thing?
I think it's more like people are thinking. I think people think photo reference and they think like tracing, and that's the thing is like I think there is some photo reference that is not so great, and then there's photo reference where you're just using it to add depth to the world and make sure it looks realistic. And I think people have a problem conflating those two types.
Yeah, well, there you go. There. Yes, yeah, and that brings us to the second thing, right? Which is using photo reference. And why is it? Just what about it, right?
Right.
Yeah, there are. I think the idea, and I'm sure that you'll agree, and I think a lot of people agree, is that you should use the reference. The reference should not use you.
Right.
Right. So you want to. It's what it is. It's a reference, and then you want to take the information from that two-dimensional representation of something and digest it and understand something a little bit better, and then you are, as an artist, also making choices and editing yourself in your then your representation of that thing that you just studied, right? In another two-dimensional form. So I think the photo reference thing can become trouble if it does become what you're saying, which is just a shot and just traced it, and then it's just basically but then it's the reference using you,
right?
Because you're sort of at the mercy of whatever the reference can give you, and photographs give you limited information. I mean, we accept them as reality because I guess we've become used to it, to just accept photographs as being a representation of reality. But they're very misleading, right? So you can't rely on them. They give you information, but that's all, right?
Right.
I think that some of those illustrations, like I think a lot about like those mid-century illustrators, Bernie Fuchs and Austin Briggs and Noel Sickles and these guys. Are you familiar with these guys?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of their work, if not all of it, is heavily photo referenced. And in most cases, I would say a lot of those drawings might have been traced off, in the sense that one of those projectors. I forget what the exact name. What are those things called?
I don't remember.
An opaque projector. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But they knew enough about drawing, and they knew how to draw, that they were able to. That you could see that in the final drawing, even if it was. There was a reference underneath. They knew what to push, what to pull, what to draw, what not to draw. What to exaggerate, what you don't have to show, what you can get away with not showing, that the reader will complete with his own eye. These things are part of drawing, right? So if you're just tracing these photographs, you don't have that discernibility. So
you lose the life in it.
You do, right?
Yeah,
you lose life in it.
Well, and I think that there was I'm not going to name any names, but there was a trend for a while in comics where there was like some, you could look at a piece of a page, a character drawing or something like that, and you see the celebrity in their face, and it's just like, I think that's where like a lot of the distaste came from. People felt like it was stepping beyond photo reference, but like I said, I think it really comes down to people conflating, photo reference is always bad, as opposed to, it depends on, it's like you're saying, you can't let the photo reference use you have to use the photo reference. And that's, I think that's something that we look at it or some people look at it as a blanket truth when it isn't really necessarily.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a weird thing. Yeah, the photograph thing is a big question. I think too, more than just reference. I mean, in a way, could it be that this is some sort of carryover from people distrusting photographs? Because
maybe
it's I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it seems like you can tell what sort of when a drawing was done from life and when it was drawn from a photograph.
Sure.
It's rare that you can't tell. Let's put it that way. This past October in New York, I got a chance to sit next to Kim Jong-gi.
Oh, wow.
And boy, was that a humbling experience. Good Lord, this guy is not of this earth.
What was it that blew you away so much? But I mean, that guy is. I look at his art and I don't even understand how he does it.
We can't understand it, right?
Right.
Because it comes from another place. I don't think he understands it. I mean, it's incredible. He's very. I think you can see in his drawings that he's got his very free mind.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to and just an amazing ability of recall, obviously,
right?
Because all that stuff was out of his head. But what I was going to say was that he showed me his sketchbook.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking through it. I asked him. First thing I asked him was, do you draw? How much do you draw from life? Mm-hmm. And his answer surprised me. He said, not that much. He does draw from life, but not that much. Not as much as you would like to, I think he said. Through his translator. He said he draws from his imagination. When he goes to a place, he remembers things about it, he remembers it, and then he'll draw it later that night in his hotel room. Mm-hmm. and I looked through his book, and he said if you see a spread, a drawing in there, where you see, like, in the foreground, a hand and a little book, that one was drawn from life. Mm-hmm. Because that's my hand and the book. So there were a few in there that you could see the hand in the book, and you could see that one was done on the spot. But flipping through that book, I'm not sure I could have pinpointed the life drawings from the ones that were out of his head. Mm-hmm. There's just a naturalism to his line, even when he's drawing out of his head, that looks like it came from life, which mm-hmm. is back to what we were talking about before. If the drawing is, if the drawing is true, if I believe the drawing, then it should look as if it was drawn from life, mm-hmm. even if it was compiled, reference compiled, 14 photographs into one drawing. It should look like one moment, one instant, and drawn from life, mm-hmm. right? So I guess, how did we get on that tangent?
Oh, we were talking about photo reference, but I mean, it kind of seems like you're talking about, like, basically the artist is putting their filter on the reality, and sometimes for Kim Jong-gi, I mean, he's working off of his memory, and it's almost imperceptible, the difference between that and his life drawing, and I think that's amazing. But I want to get back to covers. I had a quick question for you. Well, maybe not a quick question, but I'm curious as to how you balance, like, trying to create a compelling illustration and also, like, telling a story, because I know storytelling is super important for you with with your covers. Is finding the right balance between those two sides something you actively strive to do, or is that something that, I don't know, it's one of those things that just kind of comes naturally to your work?
I don't know. I'm not sure what would come naturally and what not will come naturally.
Yeah.
But it's So you're curious about how if I sound distracted is because I'm in the studio. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. No, I mean, more or less my question was with with a cover, so like let's talk about like the Sheriff of Babylon with a cover. I think that there could be a difference between saying something that's meaningful related to the story and also just coming up with something like we were talking kind of about like pinups or coming up with just like a character drawing or something like that. You could do something that is just a good illustration but wouldn't represent the story, or you can come up with something that represents the story but isn't a good illustration in the way you would want it to be. Is that a fine line? Is that something you think about as you're doing? You want to try to represent both halves there?
I see what you're saying. No, but there, you see, I guess the thing that was confusing, was tripping me up, is that I don't think it could be a good illustration if it doesn't deal with the story.
Sure.
And I don't think that if it deals with the story well, it will make a bad illustration. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like they cancel each other out.
Yeah.
So I guess that's why I was a little like tripped up. But I think more and more that the more specific it is to the story, the better it will be. I just do. I mean, whenever I'm working on something where I don't feel I have the story behind me, pushing me, mm-hmm. I feel like I'm basically performing an exercise in drawing.
Right.
And that becomes really boring.
So do you find that like it would be really hard? It seems like it would be really difficult for you, or maybe even impossible for you, to take a project that you're not connecting with on a real, tangible level. Yeah,
but here's the thing that you don't find out until you're into the project, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that beforehand. I don't know if I'm going to be in it on a tangible level, connected, until I'm already kind of halfway through it. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Is that part of the reason why? I mean, I know you've worked with Brian Wood, a fair amount in the past. Tom King, you worked with on the CMYK story and in Sheriff. Do you feel like you kind of can trust in certain people and that that you're going to connect with it one way or another just because the way that they explore stories?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. That's fair.
Well, I wanted to ask about interiors a little bit too, because I know that you said you had a slightly different process, but one thing I read in another interview with you was you had worked on New X-Men and Captain America over at Marvel, and you had said you had kind of a mixed experience because of kind of who you were partnered with on those. Not that like they themselves are necessarily bad creators, but you worked with Bill Sienkiewicz inks over your line art on New X-Men, and you loved that, and you also thought that Tom Palmer's inks gave you interesting contrast on Captain America, but you didn't really like the colors. They just didn't stand out for you, or they didn't work for you from a complementary standpoint. When it comes to interiors, do you find that you prefer keeping control over the full look of the book? Like you would rather try to handle like as much of the line art and even the colors if you could, or were those particular cases just more of a mixed bag for you?
Those particular cases were sort of, when you say those particular cases, you mean the X-Men work?
Yeah, the New X-Men book, and then also your Captain America, the Jack Monroe story.
Yeah, those were pretty much the standard, mainstream comics type stories, and the teams that get put together, given the circumstances by the editorial. At the time, that was sort of like that's the way most of the work that I've done has been done that way. Mm-hmm. But yeah. I guess the short answer is I want as much control as possible.
Right.
Given it comes down to time. Time is the big factor, because I can't do a monthly book. I can't do it. I'm too slow. I'm just too slow. But yeah, that's the ideal. Yes, in a perfect world, I'd like to to be able to do everything.
Mm-hmm. So it was it seems kind of like the I don't know, it almost seems like the for hire jobs in such a way kind of didn't, I don't know, it just didn't kind of jive with you, because it seems more like assembly line. It wasn't trying to find complementary, creators. It was more just finding who was available to a certain degree.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think some good stuff might have come out of that. I'm not sure that it's that cut and dry.
Sure.
I think that, that people are still trying to do the best, things that they can do. And I think at the time, some pretty good team ups. Let me see if the Sienkiewicz thing I was thrilled about.
Yeah.
for example, when I was drawing Challengers of the Unknown, and they brought in Bill Reinhold to ink some of that stuff toward the end of the run, and that was a pairing that happened because of the editorial.
Right.
They brought in Bill Reinhold, and I thought it was a great match.
Mm-hmm.
And that led to us doing Earth X together.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, sometimes color's a real tricky thing. It's so subjective. It's really completely subjective. And that's, I guess, the thing that is troubling about it. It's subjective. Everybody has a different, and it appeals directly to people's emotions too. So that's a double whammy. I tend to like more subdued color, and I tend to like flatter color.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the more I've gotten a chance to work on my own line art, whether it be covers or interiors, I think that naturally I've started to do a little bit more in the way of like maybe imported textures, like we were talking about before, or maybe got a gradation now and then, or some Matt. Can you believe it? A lens flare now and then. I mean, wow. And it's worked. I mean, I think subtlety's the key, right?
Right. Yeah, but I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things about your work is, I talked to a lot of artists, and I mentioned this before, and I don't mean to embarrass you, but like. I remember I did this Artist August thing at Multiversity Comics back when I was there, and like every single year I would talk to like 30 artists and I would run the interviews with them, and I'd always ask them like, oh, who are the artists that like are really your jam or like influences and stuff like that, and so many would throw your name out there, and like they would just talk about how your draftsmanship and your like black and white work would just blow them away, but I'm always curious about how like. For something like Sheriff, Black Death America, you worked in black and white, but your like Sheriff covers are in color. Same with your DMZ ones. Like, how much does the presence of color change the way you approach a piece that you're doing yourself?
It affects it completely, and it affects it so much that I'm probably not even aware to what extent it affects it. Mm-hmm. Because it's not just color; it's the fact that I'll have a chance to. Do something in Photoshop that maybe I wouldn't do, like maybe blur something, or I don't know. Nothing else comes to mind right now. But just having to then work with it digitally becomes another another step. And I tell this to people sometimes when they show me at conventions when they show me their art, students, if they ask for me to look at their work or something, a lot of times if they're showing me pencils, my suggestion to them is you should ink some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Because inking will make your penciling better. So I think the same thing has happened for me with coloring my own stuff. On the occasions I do, has kind of helped my black and white illustrations become better. Because I think I'm more specifically, I think I've been forced to make maybe more definite choices. Stuff that if I wasn't coloring it, maybe I just would have not even thought was an option, not even thought was a possibility.
Sure.
Like, for example, doing a drawing on a different layer, on a different sheet of paper, and dropping it in later, something as simple as that, wouldn't have been an option before.
That's actually one thing I've seen some creators say is, you should really try other roles. Like, if you haven't lettered a comic, letter a comic, and if you haven't colored a comic, color a comic, because it can kind of change your perspective on how you're approaching the story and other facets of your work, because you kind of, it makes you think on a different level, and it makes you think, in a more holistic sense, I guess. And I think that's interesting. I don't think most people would think, like, I could see how inking could impact your pencils because it could change, like, like I talked to Chris Somney on my podcast, and he was talking about how his pencils are just horrible, and that, like, inking is where everything comes out for him. And, like, I don't think, I think sometimes people could overdo their pencils and then without having ink themselves. But once you ink yourself, you're like, oh wait, I could shortcut this process, or I could define it differently if I ink it myself.
Right.
And colors, I mean, colors could change completely because it makes you realize that, certain light sources would play this way, or, all kinds of different things. And I guess a lot of times people don't really think about that because they think about art and comics in general is this kind of siloed independent world. But if you can kind of diversify what you do, it will change the way you think about everything with your work.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah. Go ahead. The more things you can do, the more you'll have different angles from which to look at your own work. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I know you did movie style guides for things like Superman Returns, Batman Begins, Dark Knight, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing I read that you said about them was as much as, like, you appreciate those projects, you didn't particularly enjoy being art directed. And as a person who works at an advertising agency, I appreciate the sentiment of not wanting to be art directed because I feel so guilty talking to our art directors about, like, my vision on ads, because I am, like, the most... JP, I am just garbage visually. It's amazing anybody would listen to me about art ever. But is that part of the appeal to comics for you? Just kind of, having that freedom to be the artist and art director kind of in one?
Well, yeah, comics. Yeah, that is something about comics that they do give you a lot of freedom. I mean, unless I guess you're doing a job that's got a lot of licensing properties that have to be, a lot of people have to check off on. I guess, that might not be so great. I guess comics have a tradition of that, right? Letting the creators kind of do their own thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of in the tradition of comics. And comics as a medium, it's so full of problems that's really what's exciting about it. The fact that you have all these aspects that you have to bring together, and these problems. I mean, you're as a visual storyteller, you're in a way casting the comic in a way. The writer plays a huge part in that as well. You're a production designer, right?
Right.
You're a set designer. You're a costume designer. You're a stuntman. You're a lot of different, things you're bringing together. I mean, I'm using, like, the film, terminology, but you're solving a lot of problems that have to kind of work together to tell a story. Really what you're doing is world creating, and that includes the characters. And then you add to that the specifics of the story within that world. Then you have a lot of problems that you need to balance, right? And then you add to that the fact that there are multiple windows into that world on one page.
Right.
So that's another challenge, right? Then you add to that the fact that you need to accommodate text on the page, right? And that has to be pleasing to the eye. That can't just be slapped on there. So it's a design issue. And then you add to that the fact that you're being asked to, draw, whatever, cities at night and aliens from another planet that don't exist, that you have to create, that has to be believable and has to have a certain weight to it, that it can carry the story off visually and people are going to believe that it's happening. So it's a lot of problems. So, but that's all good. I mean, that's I think unique to comics because it's a very low overhead form of storytelling in a way. You know, you don't have to hire like, you know, craft services and cinematographers and actors and, you know, do locations. I guess maybe you could go out and shoot locations, but it's all basically up to you to how much do you want to get into it, because you can do it and probably, you know, get by not doing that, you know, as not dealing with like, you know, every aspect as thoroughly as maybe you can. You can do it. I mean, I think comics can hold that too as a medium. It's kind of like quick sort of delivering the message. But comics can also hold a lot more weight and a lot more, I think, time within each panel. You know, it's a frozen moment in time that ironically or paradoxically took a long time. So that one moment that you're looking at a panel, which you can spend as long as you want looking at it, that one moment that you may just fly through maybe took somebody 2-3 days to draw. So it's that is a little unique, right?
Yeah. I think that's one of like the really funny things is like, you know, people, I don't know, you like, not to downplay comic reviewers, but you look at comic reviews and I totally understand why artists get annoyed when they read like a review and it's like throws in like one offhanded comment about art where it's like, I didn't like it. And you're just like, that took me 6 weeks to draw that issue. And you're like, all I get is a throwaway line about how you don't like it. Screw you. I'm so mad at you. But that, you know, you said that you were able to like kind of fill all those roles. I kind of feel like it would be nice. Like artists need a craft services department. You need somebody who can bring you food. That like I know a lot of artists, and I feel like sometimes they don't eat enough. And I mean, maybe that can be my future role. I can move to New York City and I can become artists like craft services department or something.
That might be a great business. You might have something there.
There we go.
Well, you know, I mean, that could be good.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's a lot that work up there. I maybe I could make a branch down in Miami so I can bring you some food too. But yeah, no, I think it is interesting. It actually kind of made me think of the movie Inception, where you know, going back to the photo reference too. It's like in Inception when they're like, have you seen Inception?
Yes.
Okay, so when they're in the dream world, and like Leonardo DiCaprio's character is explained to Ellen Page's character, you know, borrow from things that you've experienced before, but don't steal, don't take it entirely. And it's kind of like, I don't know, for an artist, it's like you have to kind of do that. You have to kind of come up with your own version of reality, but don't just lift things, because that's when it becomes, you know, that's when it gets kind of problematic. But I don't know, it's very fascinating. That's just where my mind goes, though.
Yeah, you do have to somehow anchor it to something that we recognize, right? In order to bring it off.
Yeah, and I think I don't know. I don't want to, you know, blow smoke up your butt, but I think you do that very well, JP. But hey, you know what? That was actually that was all I had for you. But thank you so much for chatting with me. I really appreciate it.
Hey. Thanks for having me, David. I had a good time. I'm sorry if sometimes we were a little. I was a little slow on the uptake there, but I was actually in front of a page now that's really kind of screwing me up here. So, I spent all night. I'll tell you just a quick story here. I spent all night working on this one panel, and it was a close-up shot of the main character, and the thing was penciled. I was just inking it basically. But I was kind of doing the Chris Samnee thing where my pencils were really loose underneath and I just went right to the inks. And I ended up blacking out, I'm not kidding, maybe 75% of the panel, including background. And now I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking, holy shit, I got to go back in there with white and I got to start a bunch of highlights because you can't see anything there. It's too dark. It's too dark. And at the time, it was. I thought it was a good solution, but no, it's not good. Sometimes you just got to walk away and come back.
See, and that's one of the tricky parts about traditional. There's no like undo button on actual ink.
Yeah, you're right. That undo button, I think that undo button is doing a lot more harm than good.
Oh, you know,
And
I know you don't do a lot of digital, but it seems like it's a trap. It seems like a great thing, and then next thing you know, you undo forever. There could be like a sci-fi, like a Twilight Zone story about an artist who just undoes forever.
I like it. I like it. He does and he keeps undoing until he can no longer do anything.
At the end of it, he's just got a beard and a bunch of craft services delivered by me. But no, I mean it is kind of interesting. Like I have, you know, like I've said, I've had a ton of artists on my show, and I always have this like sneaking suspicion that most of them were working at the time, but you guys are like, I don't know. I try to like read a text message and like talk to my wife at the same time, and I'm just like uttering nonsense at her, and you actually carried a conversation while working on your art. So bravo, sir.
Well, thank you, but it's not that impressive. I'm at a stage there are certain stages where you can sort of do things a little more mindlessly, right? So that I can focus on our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm at a stage now with this page where I can really just shut my brain off and draw, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so actually, I would not have been able to talk to you if I was doing layouts, for example.
Sure.
That, no chance. But David, I really, really appreciate you inviting me on, and I had a good time. And let's do it again sometime.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist John Paul Leon. You can find John on Twitter at John Paul Leon, on his website at johnpaulleon.com, and his work on the covers of The Sheriff of Babylon. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating and review while you're at it. Also, my comics adjacent newsletter called The Crossover is in the middle of its first season. Make sure to subscribe at bit.ly/The Crossover newsletter if you want more writing from me. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen, as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for a new episode.